And as promised, Janice Stein, TVO's Foreign Affairs Analyst, Director of the Munk School of Global Affairs at the U of T. Welcome back.
Pleasure, Steve.
No shortage of stuff to talk to you about. That's why you've been in here so much lately. Last night, UN Security Council passes the resolution, 1,973, 10 votes in favor, none opposed, 5 abstentions. Why did the Security Council agree to the no-fly zone?
It's a really, really historic resolution. There's no question about it, Steve. They did because before their eyes, and Gaddafi provided all the fuel you need. He said, I am going into Benghazi and there will be no mercy. We will hunt you down in every house. That was the comments he made 24 hours before the Security Council moved. So finally, after weeks of sitting on the fence, that was too much, primarily for the British and the French, who led this.
The Security Council has demonstrated in the past a willingness to ignore even more egregious comments than that, but not this time. What's different?
I think there was this sense that the military balance had shifted so strongly in favor of Gaddafi. I myself underestimated his willingness to use brutal force against civilian populations. He's done it. He's been using air power, artillery barrages, and I think before everybody was the possibility of a real slaughter in Benghazi. That's all. There was nothing standing in the way. And that's where I think finally, the British and the French who've been pushing this for a while.
French especially.
French especially were in the lead on this, got Barack Obama reluctantly to go along with this.
The conventional wisdom, I guess, for the last couple of weeks had been, this won't happen because someone will veto it. No one vetoed it.
No.
How come?
And the really interesting abstentions, as you said, there were 5, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Germany, of course, Russia and China. The Chinese particularly, who never want to see anybody interfere in anybody else's sovereign affairs. Again, I think there was simply, a name and shame game here to stand by and allow Gaddafi to go in with armor, with artillery against fundamentally a hostage civilian population in Benghazi. It just got too much.
You'd like to think that was the reason. But the cynic in me says probably something behind the scenes, some heavy-duty negotiating went on, and China and Russia had to be promised something in order to get their abstention?
They usually do. They usually do. It's interesting, too, because the Russians had an interest in what was going on in Bahrain and the Saudis. And from everything we hear, they were the ones who actually said to the Iranians, leave this one alone. So they are worried about the instability in this part of the world. They're worried about the instability among oil exporters. They do not want oil markets rocked because that is such an important part of what they do, that Putin weighed in on this one.
Let me just read you the quote, because the resolution authorizes UN member states to, quote, take all necessary measures to protect civilians and civilian-populated areas under the threat of attack. What do you take that to mean?
So that's the historic part of this resolution, Steve. It is actually the first UN Security Council resolution since 2005, when the responsibility to protect doctrine was passed by the Security Council. That's something that our ambassador, Alan Rock, then ambassador to the UN, pushed very hard. It's really a made in Canada, exported to the world product. And here's what it really says. If there is imminent slaughter against civilians, and the Security Council authorizes action, there is a global responsibility to protect innocent civilians.
Sovereignty be damned.
Sovereignty be damned. And what was so striking about this was the all. It didn't say necessary measures. That would have been enough. It said all necessary measures. So that allows not only the no-fly zone, which is the first part of the resolution, but actually action on the ground, if necessary, to prevent Gaddafi from going after the civilians. Now that's going to be a really interesting line to draw, depending on what he does.
Let's pull this apart here, because there's two angles of this. The no-fly zone, first of all, I want to make sure we understand what that means. Because on the face of it, it means our allies patrol the skies to make sure they can't fly.
More than that.
More than that. Okay,
yeah,
what else
more
does it
than
mean?
that, because there's the challenge of, do you take out his anti-missiles, the missiles that can be used on the ground to shoot down Allied aircraft.
So it doesn't include that?
Yes, it does, as far as Secretary
So you can
of Defense.
shoot planes on the ground?
You shoot radar systems and anti-missile systems that are potentially lethal for your planes.
How about all military bases?
Well, you know, here we're getting
That's
into
what
a
I mean.
grayer
Yeah.
zone. So, but for sure, anything that is on the ground that can be used to shoot at your aircraft is legitimate. That's what Robert Gates said last week. You notice, by the way, nothing has yet happened of that sort. But in order to enforce that no-fly zone, that's clearly a minimum. There's going to be some bombing of anti-aircraft assets on the ground, if that's what it comes to.
Again, taking this quote, though, all necessary measures.
So that's more. So what if Gaddafi sends, and that's why I say this is so interesting and it's historic, what if Gaddafi sends a column of armored tanks down the road to Benghazi? That's not in the air, that's on the ground.
Right.
This resolution would authorize those who are participating to bomb that armored column.
Well, more than that, it sounds, I mean, all necessary measures says to me, and I'm not the expert you are, but that says all necessary measures could include ground troops.
It could, at the end of all this, include ground troops. Now, it is really interesting that right after the resolution was passed, the British and the French, as you say here, were the first movers on this one, said, look, the purpose of this resolution is to protect civilians. Over and over again, they said, which means it is not an excuse to go after Gaddafi and remove him from office. It is to protect civilians. But you can, if he uses either ground assets or air assets against Benghazi, or even some of the towns slightly to the west, all necessary, any kind of use of force is legitimate here.
Is a no-fly zone an act of war?
Yes, you have to say it is. It's an act of war authorized by the Security Council because you're going to do two things in a no-fly zone. You're going to take out assets on the ground, which can threaten your aircraft, and if he puts an airplane in the sky, which I don't think he's going to do, but if he does, you shoot it out of the air.
So we are officially in a state of war between Libya and the rest of the world.
That's right. The United Nations has authorized, essentially it's a Chapter 7 resolution. It has authorized the use of force against Gaddafi should he threaten civilians.
Chapter 7 resolution meaning?
That's the part of the UN Charter. Chapter 6 are all the peacekeeping, mediating resolutions. Chapter 7 are the most stringent resolutions the United Nations can authorize. Those, in fact, authorize the use of force by the international community against an aggressor. The interesting thing now, it's not an aggressor against another state. It's an aggressor against your own civilians.
That's different.
That's different. First time.
Here's, of course, the question at the end of the day. Many people are happy this resolution finally happened, but is it too late?
Well, it's really interesting. The resolution passes, and literally, within the snap of fingers, Gaddafi comes out and says, oh, his foreign minister, we're going to observe a ceasefire. This, after just a few hours before, he was threatening to go house to house and root everybody out.
Does make you wonder why they didn't do it 2 weeks ago.
Yes, it does. So it had a major impact right away on the ground. Now, is he going to do it? We've heard statements, both from the United States, Britain, and France the last few hours. They are not listening to what he's saying. They are watching what he's doing. There are still reports of fighting in at least 2 towns, so they want all fighting to stop. When it stops, what do we have here, Steve? Big question mark. 2 governments, one in Benghazi and slightly to the east, and Gaddafi left in power in Tripoli. No playbook for this one.
So we're making it up as we go along.
We're going to make it up as we go along. Because the resolution does not authorize his ouster.
Right. However, he has said for the moment, ceasefire is in place.
Right.
But based on what you know of the region and of him, you know, you taking that to the bank?
Well, he's in a corner now. I mean, the situation turned on a dime here. Because without some form of intervention, he really would have finished off the revolution in another 48 hours. It's now very, very clear to him that if he provokes in any way, there will be major military action against his forces, against his bases, against his assets. So he stands to lose enormously if he puts a plane in the sky or he uses any force against civilians. It would be a suicidal act on his part. There's nothing to suggest he's suicidal.
So the ceasefire, by agreeing to the ceasefire, what's his play here?
His play is he controls 2/3 of the country. He stops. He leaves a rebel government in control of Benghazi and just slightly to the east, and an international coalition that is on a watching brief with nothing to do. How long can they keep that one up?
So his sense is, I've got 2/3 of the country now, and I'll wait them out.
I'm going to wait them out.
And then get the rest of my country back.
Yeah, when everybody has lost interest.
which happens almost all the time, doesn't it?
It does happen.
You can almost set your watch to when the so-called international community loses interest.
So this is going to be a test of endurance now, between the international community on one hand and Gaddafi on the other. Who can be more restrained but more resolute?
Who's going to win the test? Are we up to the test?
Is the international community up to
Right.
the test? It's a call, in all honesty, and it's a call for two reasons. One, because you have to stay focused, and that's all very, very difficult for the international community. And two, because people are quickly going to start asking questions like, why is it all right for Saudi Arabia to roll an armored column into Bahrain? And then the Bahraini government goes after its own civilians in a pretty violent way, but it's not all right for Gaddafi. There are some glaring inconsistencies here, which the United Nations Security Council is going to have to grapple with.
What opportunity does this Security Council resolution give to Gaddafi to kind of marshal the forces within his country and say, look what these rich Western outsiders are doing to us, come with me?
You know what? I don't think that's credible because the first request for the resolution came from the Arab League. There will be Jordanian participation in this, as well probably from the United Arab Emirates. We'll see in the next 24 hours. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult for him to spin it that way, although he will try.
Now, let's just take the next step forward here and figure out how you actually enforce this resolution that they've passed.
If he observes the ceasefire, nobody does anything.
Well, do NATO planes go up in the sky, or do American, French, British jets go up there?
The
What
United
happens?
States already has what's called AWACS, which is intelligence gathering aircraft that are in the sky monitoring, and in real time, Steve, they see a grasshopper move, okay? And transmit the information to
nothing's gonna
pilots
get
on the
past them.
ground. Nothing will get past them. So there's really no need to send fighter aircraft up into the sky unless they see something move. So you're going to have a long stalemate. You could have a long stalemate.
Let me tell you what you already know, but share with our viewers what Canada's Prime Minister announced today, which was that the Canadian forces will enforce the resolution. The Government of Canada has authorized the deployment of CF-18 fighter jets to join the HMCS Charlottetown in the region. What do you read into that?
Canada, and it was a pretty strong statement actually from the Prime Minister, the strongest statement he's had. So we will clearly be joining in the air war and air enforcement. We will be working with the United States and Britain as we've done in the past. HMS Charlottetown is deployed in support of that. And I suspect, Steve, that this will probably play in domestic politics a little bit. It might be possible for the Prime Minister to argue that we need those C-35s and they have to be interoperable. In other words, because the United States has C-35s, this might not be such a bad idea.
The F-35s.
I would not, yeah, F-35s.
F-35s.
I would not be surprised.
Even when it comes to Libya, all politics is local.
All
Is that
politics
what you're
is
saying?
always local.
I wonder if part of this decision as well, I don't know, I'm asking you to speculate on this. Some people criticize the Prime Minister for getting off too late on this one, that things had happened in Libya, and the criticism was that he didn't back the rebel side early enough and forcefully enough. Is this meant in some respects to compensate for that?
Well, I think that's not only a criticism that was leveled against our Prime Minister, it's also been leveled against President Obama. And once President Obama went along yesterday afternoon, it was virtually inconceivable that we would stay out of it, especially given the political context, and in all seriousness as well, especially given the likelihood of carnage in Benghazi, which was just too much for people to stomach.
If our planes are there, and if they are engaged, who calls the shots over there?
There will be an integrated command structure.
Under whom?
Well, it's not the United Nations. The United Nations authorizes the action, and then the allies coordinate amongst themselves. So there'll be intelligence sharing, there'll be exchange among the pilots, and there's a division of labor, frankly, a rotation. So this is all to be worked out. There's a meeting tomorrow morning in Europe to work out the details. In the past, it's usually been an American commander because they contribute, disproportionate share of the assets. You really can't do much of anything in the world from a military perspective without the United States
the
there
Yanks.
still.
Okay, last minute here, let's touch on this. I gather there will be some people who will argue that a decision of this significance in terms of deploying Canadian forces ought to have been debated in Parliament, ratified by Parliament? What's your view on that?
There probably wasn't, in all honesty, there was not enough time. This moved very, very quickly yesterday. I mean, they moved from being absolutely stymied to a full-scale, forceful resolution in 24 hours. But the Prime Minister did say that if the deployment is extended, he will take it to Parliament and will ask for a resolution of Parliament. So he's clearly cognizant of that issue.
Just finally, how do you think Sarkozy's looking today?
Pretty good. Pretty good, pretty good. To the surprise of all the other allies, he's looking pretty good.
When the French are leading militarily,
Yeah,
it's a different world, isn't it?
It is.
It is. Janice, as always, thanks a lot for your help on this.
A pleasure.